Thank you. You can be seated. You can be seated. Well, good morning. My name is Lori Ost, and it is an honor and a joy to be with you on this beautiful Sunday morning. And happy Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day. We want to welcome you if you are here for the first time and all of you who will be joining us online. So Church of the Hills, let's put our hands together. Let's give them a very warm welcome. Yes, we welcome you. Well, I just want to say that I love this church. I love our pastors. I love everyone who serves from week to week so faithfully. And I really love what Jesus is doing in this place. You know, as a church, we're here to help people to know God, to really have a relationship with Him, and to find freedom and discover purpose and make a difference. And so my prayer for you today is that you'll be encouraged to run the race that God has for you. You know, several years ago, my husband and I decided to take a trip to New York. We'd always wanted to go to New York City, and we were able to spend actually several days, you know, navigating the city, taking in the sights, the sounds, the food, meeting some interesting people. And so while we were there, because both of us really like to hike, we decided we wanted to spend an entire day hiking. So we did some research, and we found a place that was actually well known for its trails and for its hiking. And the name of this place is called Breakneck Ridge. So we loaded up our backpacks, put water, Gatorade, snacks. We loaded up our backpacks and we headed off on this adventure. So we get there, and there's several different trails to choose from, depending on the degree of difficulty. So we choose the easier trail because we've never been there. We didn't really know what to expect. So we're walking this trail, and it's mountainous. It's absolutely gorgeous. But we finished kind of early, and we look at the time. We think, hey, it's early in the day. We can do this. Let's do another trail. So we pick another trail, and this one is definitely more difficult. It actually involves some climbing, but it was worth it because it took us to some amazing views where we could see for miles in the Hudson Valley. You could see the mountains, and you could see the Hudson River, and it was gorgeous. So here we are, we're on this trail for a good bit of time, and we end up in a very remote part that doesn't look like it had seen any human beings for a really long time. And so at that point, we're thinking, let's turn around, you know, let's head back. And it's late in the afternoon. We're getting a little tired. My husband's knees are actually bothering him a little bit. So we're walking on our way back. And we're thinking, this looks really familiar. And it dawns on us, we've been walking in circles. We're not finding our way out of the park. Now, at this time, it is much later in the afternoon. The sun is going down, and I'm thinking, okay, my heart is like, I'm thinking, okay, here we are. We're in New York. Nobody knows where we are. We have no cell phone service. We have no flashlight. We have no compass. We have no matches and lions and tigers and bears. Oh my. And so I'm like, no. So anyway, my husband, he says, I think that the road is this way. And so I'm not wanting to leave the safety of the trail, and we argue, we kind of go back and forth. And I reluctantly agree to go with him. So we leave the trail and we head down this very long, very steep hill. This hill literally is so steep like this. We are grabbing trees on the way down, all the way down to keep from rolling headfirst down this long, steep hill. So we make it to the bottom of the hill. It is dark. We don't know what's in front of us. We've never been there. Dark, scary, overwhelming moment for me. And so we don't know if there's a river there. We don't know if there's a canyon there. And so my husband, brave as he is, he forges ahead, and I'm following him in the dark, and we walk and we walk and we walk, and there's a clearing. It's the road. Just like he said. He was right. I was wrong. So no nudging here. Nobody can nudge and say, okay, listen to your husbands. Well, anyway, I don't know if you have ever been in a situation like we found ourselves in that day, but I do know that all of us can face some dark, scary, overwhelming times in our life. Because let's just be honest, life can be really hard sometimes, can't it? You know, and it's not always easy to know what to do or how to navigate those times. And in the Old Testament, the children of Israel found themselves in some very dark, overwhelming times. And during those times, God always had a person that he would use to help them to navigate those times. Now, over the past few weeks, we have been looking at people of faith that have run the race before us. And as we've looked at their lives, we've gained wisdom and encouragement and perspective. See, they have finished their race, but now it's our turn. So let's continue on our journey. Let's look at our theme verse together in Hebrews 12 in verse 1. It says this, "Therefore, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles us. And let us run with perseverance the race that is set out for us." God has a race for each and every one of us to run. Now, when Moses died in the Old Testament, God raised up Joshua to lead the children of Israel into the promised land. And at the latter part of Joshua's life, he gathers the children of Israel together, and he reminds them of what God has done in their life. And he encourages them to continue to follow God, choose God, serve him. And the people say, yes, we'll follow God. We're going to continue worshiping God. And then Joshua and the elders die. Judges 2, verse 10 and 11 says this. This is what happens next. After that generation died, another generation grew up who did not acknowledge God or remember the mighty things that he had done for them in Israel. Then the children of Israel did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and they served Baal. So basically they stopped following God. And because of that, they became easy, open prey for the enemy. And so it became a dark time in the history of Israel. And during those times, God raised up judges to actually lead the people of Israel. And Deborah, one of the giants that we're running with today, was one of those judges. In Judges 4, verse 4, it says this, "Now Deborah, a prophet, the wife of Lapido, was leading Israel at that time. So she, Deborah, is in that great cloud of witnesses cheering us on, cheering us on. And if she were to leave the grandstands, what would she say to us today? What would she say to us today that would help us to run our race? Well, the first thing that Deborah would say to us, if you're taking notes, is that encouragement makes all the difference. Encouragement makes all the difference. Deborah goes and she contacts Barak, who is the commander of the army of Israel. And she goes to him, and remember, they had been oppressed by the enemy like for over 20 years. She goes to Barak and she says, it's time to fight against this enemy. God is going to give us the victory. And so Barak at that time was very intimidated. You know, their army was ill-equipped and totally outnumbered. But this is what he says to Deborah in verse 8 of Judges 4. Barak said to her, if you go with me, I'll go. If you don't go with me, I won't go. Isn't that amazing? And in verse 14, Deborah said to Barak, go. This is the day the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Has not the Lord gone ahead of you? So Barak went down Mount Tabor with 10,000 men following him. So Deborah encouraged Barak, went with him, and together they got the victory. There's something very powerful about encouragement. Encouragement will get you going. Let's say that again. Encouragement will get you going. See, when Deborah encouraged Barak, Barak was able to go from paralysis to purpose. And see, we don't know what is on the other side of our encouragement. You know what? I think that today, especially like no other time in history, people are surrounded with negativity. Don't you agree? It's like everywhere you turn, there's like bad news. You know, how about you and I be the people who bring encouragement, right? You know, it hasn't been that long ago since Baylor, our youngest grandson, started walking. And so to help him, we would prop him up. I'm sure some of you that are parents have done this. We'd prop him up, we'd get in front of him, and we'd clap and we'd cheer. We'd say, come on, Baylor, you can do it. And he'd walk, and then he'd fall down. We'd go pick him back up. We'd get in front of him, and he would take 4 or 5 steps, and we'd go, yay, yay, you can do it. And as we were cheering and we were doing this and pumping, putting our arms up and cheering him on, his eyes would light up, and he was gaining confidence. And before you knew it, he was taking 15, 20 steps, and now he's running. And his mama would tell you he's getting into everything. So encouragement makes a difference. Now, what would it look like if we encourage the people around us who are taking steps in the right direction? Now, for some people, those steps may be, attending a small group for the first time, or making a decision to get baptized, or sharing their life story or their struggle with us. Let's create such a culture of encouragement that people feel like they can do anything, that they can overcome anything. Let's be known as people who encourage and not point out failures, right? Let me ask you a question. How many of you have ever failed? How many of you knew it when you failed? Yeah. And how many of you wanted people to point out your failure? No. See, we should be the ones who remind people that God is a God of a second, fourth, 15th chance, because we're all going to fail from time to time. And what we want is someone to come alongside of us and to encourage us. So let's be those people. It was Deborah's encouragement and her bravery, that actually led to the victory that day. And yet, it's not even her name that's mentioned in Hebrews 11, verse 32. This is so good. And what more shall I say? I don't have time to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets. It was Barak's name. Her name wasn't even mentioned. And you know what? I don't think she cares. She did not do what she did to get recognition. What a challenge for us today, right? In the social media, competitive world, to actually encourage somebody else and see them get the recognition. Can we do that? Yeah. The lesson that we learned from Deborah is to be encouragers and not worry about who gets the credit, because God is working the bigger picture. Let's be people who encourage one another, right? So turn to somebody next to you and tell them, you are amazing. Tell them, you are amazing. Now all right, now turn to your second choice and tell them, you're pretty good too. All right. Yeah, one's amazing, one's pretty good. Okay. Oh, that's awesome. God is counting on you and I to go into our homes, into our schools, into our places where we work, into our world, and to bring encouragement, because encouragement makes all the difference. The second lesson that we would learn from Deborah, I believe that she would tell us this today, is number 2, we need to be brave. We need to be brave. Now, when Barak told Deborah, that he needed her to go with him into battle, I can imagine that was a lot out of her comfort zone. She was a prophet and a judge, but she wasn't a warrior. But she went. And because she went and encouraged Barak, they got victory that day. Because someone, in this case a woman, was brave enough to rise up, to speak up, and to go. Isn't that awesome? Proverbs 31 encourages us to be a people who will rise while it is yet night. Now, the good news is that's not talking about what time of day you get up. So that makes some of you happy, right? But rather than when darkness and chaos are all around, we should be the people who will rise. You see, God is looking for a company of people who will rise in the midst of challenge. Deborah bravely rose up in the midst of those times. And Judges 5, verse 7 says this. It says, villagers in Israel would not fight. They held back until I, Deborah, arose, until I arose a mother in Israel. You know, we live in a time in history where we desperately need brave men and women, don't we? We do. We live in some dark, hard times. We desperately need brave men and women. And when God says to us in Joshua 1:9, he says, haven't I commanded you? Strength, courage. Don't be timid. Don't get discouraged. God, your God, is with you every step you take. He is asking us to be brave for a reason. You know, brave is more than a feeling. It's more than a word that's printed on a t-shirt. Brave is a conviction. Brave is a conviction. And on a large global scale, we need to be brave to stand up against global injustices like disease and poverty, human trafficking. You know, I'm so thankful that, you know, our church supports a ministry that's on the front line of rescuing young women from the sex slave industry. We need to be brave. We're to stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves. You know, Deborah risked her own life to see the children of Israel get freedom that day. She didn't just encourage them from the sidelines, but she joined in the battle. Now, God is talking not only about the bravery that is needed on a large global scale, but just everyday bravery. We need bravery every day of our lives, right? You know, everyday bravery to stick it out through a rough season in your marriage. Bravery. We need bravery. Everyday bravery to forgive people that have hurt you and that keep on hurting you. Everyday bravery. Bravery to love those that are hard to love, or everyday bravery to keep our mouth shut when we want to attack. I need some of that. Everyday bravery. We need to be brave. You know, and you may ask, well, how can we be brave? How can we be brave? Well, number one, the first reason that we can be brave is we know who we are. See, you can be brave, I can be brave because I know who I am. See, I know that I'm loved beyond measure and there's nothing that can separate me from the love of Christ. I know that I'm a child of the Most High God. God's my Father. And if He is for me, who is going to be against me? Right? I know that I'm more than a conqueror. Do you know who you are? Do you know who you are? I just want to encourage you to spend time in the Bible and find out what God says about you. Because when you know who you are, you can be brave, right? Now Deborah knew who she was. See, she knew that she was called for that moment. And because she knew that God had called her for that moment, she could stand where she stood and be brave. The second reason that we can be brave, I can be brave because heaven is my home. Heaven is my home. As followers of Jesus, we are citizens and ambassadors of another world. You see, this world is our assignment. Heaven is our home. You see, our purpose is eternal. It's not just for the here and now. Our purpose is eternal. And we are told in Philippians chapter 3 that our citizenship is actually in heaven. And in Ephesians, we're told that we are seated with Christ in heavenly places. That's our position, is seating with Christ in heavenly places. When Paul wrote to the Corinthians, he refers to us as Christ's ambassadors. Now, as ambassadors, you see, we live in one world, but we represent another world. We represent another world. And my job on planet Earth is to represent the heart of God and to fulfill His mission. Doesn't that just simplifies life for me? See, my job on planet Earth is to represent His heart and to fulfill His mission. And when I do, All of heaven's resources are at my disposal to carry out the king's orders. You see, we're not brave because of our own name. We are brave. We can be brave because we have the full support of heaven's armies. See, Deborah knew when she stepped into battle that day, she was not stepping there on her own. And when you are on the mission that God has assigned you, whatever that looks like, it's not you. God is right there beside you. We can be brave because heaven is our home and earth is our assignment. And the third reason that we can be brave is the promise of Romans 8:28. It says, and we know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God and to those who are called according to his purpose. Now, this is not always easy. It's not always easy because life can be very full of some difficult times that are very overwhelming. You know, the children of Israel, faced some of those dark, difficult times, and God used Deborah to remind them that he was present and he was able to lead them to the victory. Ephesians 2, verse 10 tells us that we are God's masterpiece. Let's look at this together. We are God's masterpiece. He has created us anew in Christ Jesus so that we can do the good things that he has planned for us long ago. We are his masterpiece now. I don't always feel like his work of art. You might not always feel like his masterpiece, but you are. You are. You are his tapestry. And one thing that I figured out is that God works from the backside of the tapestry. See, and if you will let him, he will take all of the threads, those that have come, from some good, happy times, those that have come from dark times, those that have just come from time, change, those that the enemy brings, and he will take all of these things and work them together for your good. And sometimes we think, if God were really sovereign, if he really cared, that there'd be some kind of purpose or pattern, but oftentimes our lives look like the backside of the tapestry. There's no real pattern. There's a bunch of unrelated colors and just a tangled mess of loose threads. And yet, we can know that God will cause all things to work together for our good. See, he will take all of this and form us into his masterpiece. Into his masterpiece. In my own life, there have been a lot of bright, happy days, a lot of bright colored threads. But to be honest with you, in the last several years, there have been a lot of dark threads, a lot of dark thread moments in my own personal life. In 2014, on the end of the year, my husband was told that the place where he had been employed for over 20 years was closing. So here he was in his 50s. Okay, in his 50s, having to prepare resumes, having to look for a job, having to prepare himself to be interviewed again. Hard times. And those of you that are married, you understand that when your spouse is going through stuff, you are going through stuff, right? Hard time. And then in 2016, we're told that he has cancer. And so we schedule a surgery. The doctor didn't want to wait. We schedule the surgery. They remove the tumor. We go back for a follow-up visit. Again, they find more cancer. We schedule a second surgery. We go back for the follow-up. And the third time, again, they find more cancer. Bad, dark thread moments for us. And let me tell you, there were days that it was really hard and I had to work really hard to choose joy. And let me just tell you that joy is not a feeling. Joy is a decision. And joy is that steel rod that will run up and down your back, that will hold you together, that will hold you strong when all of this is happening around you. The joy of the Lord is my strength. It's my strength. And we might not like the colors of our threads, those places that maybe have come from the loss of a job or financial crisis or broken or strained relationship. Today, you might be in a season of waiting, and there's no answer that's coming. Or maybe today you're hurt or you're angry. Well, let me just tell you, it's not the end of the story. It is not the end of the story. And if you will let God, if you will let him, he will take all of these things and cause them to work together for your good. And you may ask, how? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know how he makes my heart beat. I don't know how he put the stars in the sky. I don't know how a seed becomes a tree. I don't know how a man's mind works. I don't know. There's a lot of things I don't know. I don't know, but I do know that God will cause all things to work together for good because we love him and we're called according to his purpose. All things, say this with me, all things, one more time, all things will be used in his masterpiece. This is the mystery of his grace. And I can be brave because I know that. See, bravery will keep you going. Bravery will keep you going. It'll keep you going. Now, if we're not careful, these words can just become cliche. They can become a religious phrase that's so often misused. You know, when somebody's going through a hard time and someone says, hey, God's gonna work it out, it rarely brings the help or relief that is intended, right? It's because the relief and the help don't come from the words. We have to get past the words to the knowing. We just have to know. And let me just say this, that tragedy, job loss, financial crisis, marriage meltdown, cancer is never good. Never good. And I don't want to minimize any difficulty, any painful situation that you may be facing right now. But it's just that in these times, bravery is needed. It's needed. So be brave. Keep going. God is working it all out. You know, my view of the tapestry, all I can see are the bits and pieces that are in front of me. This is all we see in our life is just what's in front of us, because our lens is temporal. Our lens is time related. But see, God's lens is eternal. He sees from an eternal perspective. You know, in the story of Joseph, in Joseph's life, if we were to zoom out of his tapestry and look at his tapestry, we may think, wow, that's amazing, Joseph's life. But if you focus on a single thread, you lose sight of the whole tapestry. You know, those of you that are familiar with Joseph's life know that he had some bad threads, right? Bad thread moments. He was hated by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused by Potiphar's wife, thrown into prison, and while he's in prison, he's forgotten about for a very long time. Bad threads, and yet God caused all those things to work together for good. Later, we see Joseph in a place of authority where God uses him to save the lives of millions of people. When Joseph chose to reveal himself to his brothers, the ones who betrayed him, this is what he told them. He said, what you meant for evil, God has meant for good. So God took all of those things and worked them together for good for Joseph, and he will do the same for you and for me. He will. That's who he is. That's who he is. So let me ask you a question. Are you having trouble seeing the other side of your tapestry? Does your life seem to go from one unrelated event to another? from one painful experience to another? Well, let me reassure you that the same God who has a divine plan for history has a divine plan for your life. And our bravery comes from that. So be brave. Keep going. God is working it all out. Yes, amen. You know, I wish that sometimes our lives didn't look so messy. But you know what? Isn't it beautiful that God can take a mess and he makes it into a masterpiece? Romans 8, verse 29. Let's look at what God's word says. He says, for whom he foreknew, he predestined to become conformed to the image of his son. You see, God is taking all the pieces of your life, all the pieces. You have to understand that when God's grace comes in, he doesn't just start where you are, but he takes the past, the good, the bad, the ugly, the present, and the future, and he uses it all to create his masterpiece. And so God is taking all the pieces of your life, and he's making and he's forming you into the image of his son. Now, I'm pretty sure Jesus looks nothing like that. That's the best I could do. Well, you know what? We live in a society and in a culture that desperately needs to see Jesus. You know, God used Deborah in a dark time in history. He used her encouragement and her bravery. And on planet Earth today, in this dark time in history, God is using his people. He is trusting us with this moment in history. And what he's asking you today is, will you trust me? Will you trust me to take all the pieces of your life and mold you and make you and form you to look like my son, Jesus? Because what the world doesn't need to see is Lori. It doesn't need to see you. What it does need to see is Jesus, because only Jesus brings change and only Jesus brings hope. Now, I wish that I could tell you that the Christian life was just like mountain, mountain, mountain. But in reality, it's like mountain, valley, mountain, valley, valley, valley. But you know what? God does some of his most amazing work in the valley. So be brave. Keep going. God is working it all out. And I don't know where you are today, or what challenges that you're facing right now, but I believe that Deborah would remind you that you can be brave, that we can be brave because we know who we are. Heaven is our home, and we know that God is working all things together for our good because we love him and we're called according to his purpose, with every head bowed and every eye closed. Now, I imagine that there are some of you here today that have never made peace with God, that you've never given your heart, your life to Jesus, the one who loves you, who died so that you could be forgiven and free, the one who can take all the threads of your life and make something beautiful. In just a moment, we're going to give you an opportunity to say yes to Jesus, to give him your heart and to give him your life. And if you do, you can leave this place today knowing that your sins are forgiven and that you are free from guilt and shame. So when I count to 3, if that is you and you want to give your heart and your life to Jesus, I want you to simply raise your hand. We're not going to have you stand up. We're not going to have you come forward. But if that is you today, you want to say yes to Jesus and give him your life. On the count of 3, 1, 2, if you will raise your hand, 3, if that is you today, and you say, I want to give my heart and my life to Jesus. Thank you. Thank you. You can put your hand down. That's awesome. Thank you. Now I'm going to lead us in a prayer. So pray this with me. Thank you, Father, for loving me. Thank you for sending Jesus to die upon a cross for my sins. I believe that he came, that he died, and that he rose again. And only he can forgive me and make me new. Jesus, I give you my heart and my life. Help me to love you and to follow you all the days of my life. In the wonderful name of Jesus.